So today we're talking about a film which is a comedy drama musical, I think is what they're describing it as. It's called Chuck Chuck Baby, directed by Janis Pugh, who I caught up with recently. I spoke to her, she's written it as well. I think it's based on a short that she released maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So it's like the continuation of that story. Sean is here, and my name is Phil. We are Boys on Film. How are you, love?
I'm fine. Yeah, so it's set in Wales, and it follows the story of a set of women, one of which is Helen. Helen lives with a guy called Gary, who's a bit of a knobhead, who's her ex-husband. He's moved his girlfriend into their house, so there's the three of them, and Gary's mother, Gwen, who is, on her last legs. She's actually not very well at all, and Helen has been looking after her. And Helen really has been this kind of lady that the people in the factory call Helen the house or Helen the handmaid, because she is never kind of in a romantic tangle and looking for a home. And what transpires is she's always really been in love with Joanne, and Joanne returns to town.
Yes.
And that's where the story begins.
Yeah, I should say that this film has had quite a good response at the film festival so far. There's two film festivals, Toronto International Film Festival, went down a storm there, and also the Edinburgh International Film Festival. So I'm glad to see that, people are receiving it well, and I think it's, obviously it's got some darkness to it, but I think overall, I think it's a feel-good movie, and I think people need that at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it straddles an element of a musical, an element of a comedy, and an element of a drama. Not in equal 30%, 30%, 33% kind of things, but yeah.
Let's talk about the cast first of all. Louise Brealey, who was in Smack the Pony, Annabelle Sholey, who was in The Sixth Commandment. Did you see that? She was amazing in that.
Well, she really, when she appeared on screen, I was like, oh my gosh, this lady has a really familiar face.
Yeah, really good actor. But anyway, it is a continuation of the short film, which is Blue Collars and Buttercups, which was about a young woman working in a chicken factory. I think it was semi-autobiographical. So I think Janis Pugh wrote that story almost like inspired by her life growing up in a chicken factory herself. So I think she's taken a lot of inspiration from her friends and, the experiences that she's had. So it is kind of like an expansion of that short.
There were elements of it that I really liked. Like, I found the relationship between the women in the factory really touching.
Yeah.
And didn't feel particularly forced. It felt quite natural, It was a group of working class women working on a night factory in a chicken factory, night shift on a chicken factory. And I thought it was quite touching. The musical components threw me slightly.
Oh, really? See, I thought they were really original, because normally we used to, like recreations of original music. So it's like their vocals. I mean, this was their vocals, but it was on top of the original music. So it was almost like hearing or seeing someone performing like to a song on the radio or something. So for me, that felt more natural, I think, than the other way of doing it. It just
surprised me.
Okay.
It surprised me. Because I guess I wasn't primed for that. So I was a little like, oh, this is interesting. Wasn't really primed for that. And then whenever you sprinkle something with musicality, you then take it something slightly more fantastical. And I think that's where I had a slight disconnect, because musicals take you somewhere fantastical. And there's certain scenes in it that feel very fantastical, but you are grounding it in what is a working class council estate in Wales, of which the backdrop is a lot of ladies working in a chicken factory, underpinned by a lost lesbian love. So for me, I was like, oh, I'm to try and get my head around all these components. So it landed, but it wasn't so natural for me, but I did enjoy it.
It felt more jarring to you in that sense.
Yeah, I was a little bit like, okay, do you want to take me down a route? Which route do you want to take me down? And I think it was a bit like choose your own adventure. And so I enjoyed it, but I do think when you sprinkle something with a musical component, and I have to say that the soundtrack is fantastic.
Well, I was just going to say, because these are songs that I wouldn't necessarily have in my collection, but when I heard them, I thought, wow, these are really great, powerful songs and really emotive songs. And it's artists like Neil Diamond, and we've got Minnie Riperton and Janice Ian's in there as well. So these are very kind of big songs from the 70s, but not necessarily household songs, if you know what I mean. I mean, obviously they're very popular songs, but I wouldn't say they're the predictable songs that people would put in a musical, if that makes sense.
No, so I really loved that. And what I found was, it felt like these are the records that Helen and Joanna played growing up, and they got some sense of escapism and relief from this kind of music, because it'd been what they would have heard as kids, and it's like late 70s, early 80s music. And so I was like, I can ground myself in that. My personal view was that then when you layer on musicality to that, it takes it somewhere else. So that's my views on my own. I found that I struggled a little bit with that component of how the film and the story played out.
That's fair, and I think my other half, Jeremy, would feel the same as you. I think I enjoyed it much more than he did. But there's a lot of humour in this film. I mean, there's some killer lines. One line from Sorcha Cusak's character, who actually says the C word, and that I gasped, but I howled, because it's like something you wouldn't expect an elderly person to say, or an older woman to say. But then, of course, you do remember, and I said this to Janis when I interviewed her last week, you do remember that older women and older people do say things like this. So I think that's why it was funny, why I thought it was hilarious, was because it's kind of like the taboo thing that you just expect older people not to have language like that. But of course they do, because, they feel the same as us.
Of course. And yeah, no, I thought her character, I felt that her character was probably, Gwen was the most rounded. I felt it was the most believable against this backdrop. And I think the other thing that was probably jarring against me was, I just read this book, which is called Working Class Queers by Yvette Taylor. It talks about the fact that on estates across the country, there are queer people, but often you don't think about it. And so I was really intrigued by the story, because I was like, this is basically a lesbian couple on a working class estate in Wales. So I was really intrigued by that. And I liked elements of how that played through, because, again, the women in their factory was just quite matter of fact about it. There was some sensationalism, but really there wasn't.
Yeah.
They were just like, this is what goes on. And so I was intrigued by that component of the film, and that's probably one of the things that drew me to probably wanting to watch this, which was that component and how it plays out, and I think that worked out very well.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to Janis about the love element as well, and about the homophobia that obviously some of the characters face in this, and she didn't want it to be a story about homophobia as such. She wanted it to be love is love, that kind of expression, rather than just saying it's a gay love story. Because obviously people will say that. They'll say it's a gay love story. It's like people that say, oh, it's a gay wedding. Do you know, it's that kind of thing. It's just a wedding. It's a love story.
I think that's my point. You could say, oh, they're working class queers, or it's a love story about lesbians on a... You don't have to do any of that.
Yeah.
Right. I think that plays through quite nicely. I think there's it tracks nicely through that, which is it isn't overplayed.
Yeah, that definitely comes across, doesn't it? Her intention, I think, comes across, and wanting it to be that kind of film. But of course, you have to remember back in the 80s and back in the 70s, there was a lot of homophobia. I mean, we're starting to see that again now. It's kind of come full circle in a lot of ways, which is quite disturbing. But we have progressed. We have progressed a lot. But yeah, I think it's nice to see a film that does go down that route rather than what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, I agree.
I think there's a lot of good character development in this, because sometimes with musicals you don't really get a sense of the people, and I think you do get a sense of the people in this and how different they are, and in some ways they're quite similar as well, especially with the love story.
Yeah, I think there's not a huge cast, and I think the cast that you have, there's great character development, like Paula, played by Beverly Rudd, who is in the factory. Like there's some big characters, there's some not tropes, but there are people that you would expect to see in that kind of narrative. But I think it's done in the right way, where it's not over labored. And I think Phil, you and I have seen a hell of a lot of queer movies and queer documentaries in the past, and I think this is something different and does something quite special. Was it a film that reminded you of other films? Because in some ways it did remind me of Beautiful Thing, and it reminded me of Pride. But I think, like you said, it did deliver something different, and I think it felt quite refreshing. And also the whole musical element was different. I know that, it caught you off guard a little bit, but I kind of embraced that. I quite like the fact that it was just them singing along to the songs, because it felt more natural to me doing it that way. It made me think of Beautiful Thing for sure. It didn't make me think of Pride, but it did give me that kind of... in Beautiful Thing, where they kind of get wrapped up in their own romance and they become basically their own world in a way. That's what it did remind me of that. It did make me think of that when I was watching it.
And you said about the ex-husband being a complete knob. There's a really good closing scene. It's not the actual final scene, but it's the third act, and it's the lead up to the big crescendo, the big finale. And he plays a big part of that. And I think the way they choreographed that was just so good. It was all slow motion, and it was very dramatic, and it was a powerful piece, I thought.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think he was a great actor. Selin Jones, who played Gary. Yeah, I thought he played an absolute blinder, to be honest. I think why it was also one of the elements I liked, why it was quite clever, is it didn't entirely labour the backstory. It allowed you to fill in the gaps, and it was smart enough to do that without having to really labour it home. But you could get a sense of Joanne's upbringing and what happened and how she is, and who she is and why she is how she is. So I think that was quite smart, actually, without going, because I think if you do that again, think about those, is it a musical, is it a drama, is it a comedy? It would very much labour down the drama route. And I think then it would be underpinned by it being a queer story, because I think then it would be deep rooted in some of the backstory. So I think that was quite smart.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love how the bigotry was played out as being what it is, an unwanted noise. It was kind of like, I can hear this buzzing in my ear. It's not, it's not making my life any richer, so just sod off. It was that kind of, like, it was just noise, wasn't it? And I love that. And I love how it, portrayed the women as being strong women and as the men as being somewhat pathetic, which I thought was, applause, because he was a complete knob. So, verdict, Sean Vickers for Chuck Chuck Baby.
I thought it flowed very well. Didn't want it to be 20 minutes shorter, which is massive.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the rating I gave on IMDb was a 6 out of 10, which is 3 stars.
It's 4 stars for me. I thought it was well written. I liked the story. It wasn't predictable. Although elements of that, with a musical, I think, in some ways you have to be predictable because that's what people love. It's like a crowd pleaser. I think it was a crowd pleaser because I think it was joyous. There was a lot of darkness in there and it didn't feel clunky to me. I liked the musical elements. I thought that was quite refreshing, like I said earlier. And I thought the performances were great. So Chuck Chuck Baby, I think it comes out later this year. I don't think there's a release date for it. We're a bit upfront with this one because it's just been shown at the film festivals, like I say. And obviously Janis Pugh is doing the promo for it at the moment. So yeah, look out for it whenever it will be in the cinemas. I'm sure it'll be a big release, I would imagine. I'd like to think it would be popular.
So, yeah, I mean, it's getting some good noises at the festivals.
Yeah,
I think it has a story to tell. I'd say my rating, which I think is a very solid rating, it kind of took me by surprise. Let's put it that way. And that it took me a little while to get my head around what was going on. But I think it's sound as a film.
Thank you as always, Sean. Thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. Leave your comments down below, and yeah, we'll see you on the next one.